Somewhere in the American Southwest, there is a greenhouse where tomatoes grow in January. Not pale, flavorless imitations shipped from another hemisphere, but ripe, red fruit harvested the same morning. The plants that produce them do not follow the calendar. They do not wait for spring. They do not rest in winter. They simply grow, flower, fruit, and repeat, week after week, month after month, without pause. And yet, if you walk into nearly any grocery store in the country, you will not find them. This is not a story about technology. It is not about organic farming or backyard gardens. It is a story about a system, a supply chain so vast and so locked into its own logic that it has become almost incapable of accepting anything new. The plant at the center of this story is not rare. It is not exotic. It is not genetically modified in some controversial laboratory. It is simply a plant that produces food continuously, without the constraints of traditional growing seasons. And the reason it has not transformed American agriculture is far stranger than you might expect. To understand what happened, you have to go back to the way food moved in this country 100 years ago. In the early 20th century, most Americans ate what grew nearby. Seasons dictated everything. Summer meant fresh corn, tomatoes, and berries. Winter meant root vegetables, preserved meats, and whatever could be stored in a cellar. The entire rhythm of eating followed the rhythm of the land. But then something changed. Railroads connected distant farms to distant cities. Refrigerated trucks followed. Suddenly, a strawberry grown in California could appear on a table in New York 3 days later. The supply chain was born, and with it came a new kind of logic. This logic was not about flavor. It was not about nutrition. It was about predictability. A national grocery chain cannot operate on surprise. It needs to know, months in advance, exactly how many pounds of tomatoes will arrive at each distribution center on each day of the year. It needs contracts, it needs schedules, it needs farms that plant on a certain date, harvest on a certain date, and ship on a certain date. The entire system runs on calendars, and this is where the seasonless plant becomes a problem. When a plant produces food continuously, it does not fit neatly into a shipping schedule. There is no single harvest window. There is no moment when the entire crop is ready at once. Instead, there is a slow, steady stream of ripe fruit, week after week, with no natural endpoint. For a small farmer selling at a local market, this is ideal. For a multinational supply chain, it is chaos. The infrastructure that moves food across America was not built for continuous harvest. It was built for seasons. Massive cold storage facilities sit empty for months, then filled to capacity during harvest time. Trucking contracts are signed based on predictable surges. Packaging plants gear up for short, intense production runs. The entire system pulses with the rhythm of traditional agriculture, expanding and contracting like a heartbeat tied to the calendar. A plant that ignores this rhythm does not find a place in the system. It finds rejection. And so, despite decades of development, despite proof that certain crops can produce food 12 months a year in controlled environments, the American food supply remains stubbornly seasonal. Not because the plants do not exist, not because the technology is unavailable, but because the system that moves food from farm to table was never designed to handle them. Consider what happens when a single grocery chain decides to stock a new product. First, there are meetings. Buyers must be convinced. Then there are logistics. Where will the product come from? Which distribution centers will handle it? What is the shelf life? How will it be packaged? Every answer must fit within existing infrastructure. A product that requires new packaging lines, new storage, protocols, or new shipping schedules faces enormous resistance. Not because anyone opposes it in principle, but because change is expensive. And in a business that operates on margins of a few percent, expense is the enemy. The seasonless plant, for all its promise, demands change. It requires smaller, more frequent shipments. It requires packaging that can handle continuous production rather than batch processing. It requires buyers who are willing to accept variable quantities rather than fixed contracts. In short, it requires the supply chain to think differently, and supply chains do not like to think differently. They like to repeat what worked yesterday. This is not a conspiracy. There is no secret meeting where executives decide to suppress innovative crops. It is simply the weight of infrastructure. Billions of dollars have been invested in a system designed around seasonal agriculture. Warehouses, trucks, contracts, software, relationships, all of it built on the assumption that food comes in waves. To accommodate a plant that produces continuously would mean rebuilding parts of that system. And rebuilding is slow, risky, and expensive. So the seasonless plant remains on the margins. It grows in research facilities. It grows in small, specialized operations that sell directly to restaurants or local markets. It grows in countries with different supply chain structures. But it does not grow at scale in America. Not because it cannot, but because the system is not ready for it. There is a term that economists use for this kind of situation. They call it path dependence. It means that the choices made in the past constrain the choices available in the present. The railroads chose certain routes. The highways followed. The distribution centers located themselves near highway intersections. The farms positioned themselves near distribution centers. Each decision made sense at the time. But together they created a path, a groove so deep that stepping out of it became almost impossible. The seasonless plant exists outside that groove, and so it waits. Meanwhile, the grocery stores fill with produce that travels thousands of miles to simulate the variety that a single greenhouse could provide year-round. Tomatoes from Mexico in February, berries from Chile in December, apples stored for months in controlled atmosphere warehouses released slowly to maintain the illusion of freshness. The supply chain has found ways to deliver seasonal produce out of season, but it has not found ways to deliver seasonless produce at all. The irony is sharp. The very system that was built to overcome the limits of local seasons has become a barrier to plants that have no seasons at all. It can move a strawberry 5,000 miles, but it cannot handle a tomato that ripens every week in the same building. The scale is wrong. The timing is wrong. The contracts are wrong. Everything about continuous production clashes with the infrastructure of batch agriculture. Some observers believe this will change. They point to the growth of vertical farming, to urban greenhouses, to new logistics companies experimenting with direct-to-consumer delivery. They argue that technology will eventually overcome the inertia of the supply chain. Perhaps they are right, but change in food systems moves slowly. The last major transformation took nearly a century, from the first refrigerated railcar to the modern global supply chain. A new transformation, even if it begins today, may take decades to complete. In the meantime, the seasonless plant continues to grow, quietly, in facilities scattered across the country. Researchers study it. Entrepreneurs pitch it. Chefs celebrate it. But the vast machinery of American food distribution rolls on, locked into its seasonal rhythm, unable or unwilling to accommodate something that does not fit. This is not a failure of science. It is not a failure of farming. It is a failure of imagination, or perhaps simply the predictable result of a system that has grown too large to change easily. The plants are ready. The knowledge is there. What remains is the question of whether the system will ever catch up. And that is a question no one can answer with certainty. For now, the seasonless harvest remains a possibility, not a reality. A glimpse of what food could become, waiting at the edge of a supply chain that has not yet learned to see it. There is something almost poetic about this situation. A plant that defies the oldest rule of agriculture, the rule of seasons, sits waiting for a system to evolve enough to accept it. Farmers who have grown these crops know what they are capable of producing. They have seen the yields, They have tasted the quality. They understand that continuous production is not a fantasy, but a functioning reality in controlled environments across multiple continents. Yet the path from greenhouse to grocery shelf remains blocked, not by doubt about the plant itself, but by the sheer complexity of changing how food travels. Every link in the chain must agree. Every stakeholder must see profit. Every process must adapt. And until that alignment occurs, the seasonless plant will remain what it has been for years, a proven solution searching for a system willing to use it. The fields of America stretch wide under open skies. Corn rises in summer. Wheat turns golden in autumn. Orchards bloom in spring and bear fruit before the first frost. This is the agriculture the country knows, the agriculture the supply chain was built to serve. Somewhere beyond those fields, behind walls of glass and climate control, another kind of agriculture waits. It does not need the sun to set a schedule. It does not need winter to rest. It simply produces day after day, asking only for a place in a system that has not yet made room. Perhaps one day that room will appear. Perhaps the economics will shift. Perhaps a new generation of logistics will emerge, nimble enough to handle what the old system could not. Until then, the seasonless plant grows on, patient and productive, a quiet challenge to everything American food distribution believes about how crops should behave. The question that remains is not whether these plants can feed people. They already do, in small numbers, in limited markets, in corners of the food system where the usual rules do not apply. The question is whether the vast network of trucks and warehouses and contracts can ever bend far enough to let them through. History suggests that such changes are possible but rarely quick. The shift from local markets to national supply chains took generations. The shift from seasonal eating to year-round availability took decades of investment in refrigeration and transportation infrastructure. Each transformation seemed impossible until it was inevitable. Perhaps the seasonless plant stands at the beginning of another such transformation. Perhaps what looks like rejection today will look like early resistance tomorrow, the kind of friction that always precedes a major breakthrough. Or perhaps the system will hold firm. Perhaps the economics of seasonal agriculture will prove too entrenched, the infrastructure too fixed, the incentives too misaligned for meaningful change. No one knows which future will arrive, but the plant keeps growing regardless. In research stations in Arizona and California, in pilot projects funded by universities and private investors, in small operations selling to farmers' markets and local restaurants, the seasonless harvest continues. It does not care about supply chains or shipping contracts. It simply does what it was bred to do, producing food without regard for the calendar. The system was not built for such plants, but systems can change over time. And somewhere in a greenhouse, under lights that never dim, a tomato ripens in winter, waiting patiently and quietly for the world to finally catch up.